All right, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of examples of books where I would potentially skip the 9.8 and just snag the 9.6 to save myself a couple of bucks. And the very first book that we're going to look at is one that is appearing on the hot comics list on the Go Collect platform. And that's the platform we're going to be using for the analysis today. And the book that I want to start with is this one right here, Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars issue number 8. This is an incredibly popular book that is showing up on all kinds of hot lists right now. And I thought it would be interesting to take a look at this one. For those that don't know, this is the origin of the symbiote costume that later becomes Venom. Awesome cover here, no doubt about it. This book was released in 1984. So when we scroll down and start to dig into some of the data, we can see that there is a high census count for this book. There are roughly 24,000 universal copies of this book out there and around 28,000 total out there. That includes the signature series, other labels, et cetera, et cetera. So a ton of copies out there, period. There are some 10s, some 9.9s, but we are specifically going to look at the 9.8. And you can see that the census count for this book is relatively high. It's a relatively high census count at 5,344 copies. The FMV is $600, which also can be a little high. Now, what's interesting, though, is that the percent of these copies that are 9.8 is on the lower side, right? In some respects, it's 22.4%. But you can see, how this book is playing out. FMV for this book is $600. The 1-year average, relatively high, has fallen at the 30-day down to $569. Most recent sale was $600. So let's go ahead and glance at the 9.6 and see how the value falls off, right? And also the affordability actually goes up for this book. The census count for the 9.6 is sitting at around 6,000 copies. The FMV, 290. 290 is the calculation that Go Collect has actually come up with. So let's go ahead and drill down and look at what's happening with this book. The 30-day average is 280, and the most recent sale for this book, I actually looked it up on eBay Terapeak. It was offered up at 266. It actually sold for 250, which is not a terrible amount of money. Now, the percent difference between the 9.8 at $600 and the 9.6 at 250 is 82%. 82% price difference between the two. The absolute dollar amount is $350. If you have the extra cash, look at the 9.8. But if you're looking to get a really awesome comic into your collection while simultaneously saving some money, looking at the 9.6 is not a terrible way to go. I should also point out that this is just an origin story. It is just an origin story. It is not a first appearance. And I think that's important to make mention of. So I wanted to throw that out there for consideration. All right. So we're going to go ahead and look at another example where I think the delta grows. I think the delta grows a little bit more for this one. This is Marvel Spotlight issue number 32. And this is a cool book. This is a first appearance and also an origin for Spider-Woman. And just a cool book. This is a book that has a great cover. I have a copy of it in the collection. So we're going to go ahead and glance at this one and see how it compares to the last and potentially why the 9.6 might actually make sense. So when you glance at this, the census count for this is much, much lower. We are looking at 5,165 universal copies and just 5,300 total copies out there across all labels. So not a ton of copies, period, right? So it's important to make mention of that. And when you look at the 9.8, you can see that the census count for this one is just 238 copies, which represents 4.6% of graded copies. A tiny number overall, a relatively tiny number of graded copies, and even smaller number when you specifically look at the 9.8, which is part of the reason why the dollar amount for this one is so high. And you can see here that the FMV for this book is $17.50. The most recent sale for this was also a best offer. I looked it up on eBay, and come to find out, this book actually sold for $1,800. Sold for $1,800 against an FMV of $1,750. And I think a lot of the value has to do with the fact that there are not a ton of copies of this book out there. So let's back up. Let's go look at the 9.6. The census count for this one is higher, but it's still relatively low. We're talking 632 9.6s out there with an FMV of 575. Let's drill into this and let's see exactly how much this book is going for. The 30-day average for the 9.6 is 461. The most recent sale for this book is 490, which is, again, that's a nice fall off from 1,800. So when we look at this one, the percent difference between the 9.8 at 1,800 and the 9.6 at 490 is 114%. 114% price difference, or an absolute dollar amount of $1,310. That is meaningful cash. That is meaningful cash, no doubt about it. And by going with the 9.6, you save yourself some money. You also can add a really nice book to your collection. Now, the other thing I will say to you is that there's nothing wrong with going with even lower grades if that's what you want to do, but you want to take some time to think about the numbers, think about the data, make sure that it actually makes sense for you when you start to drill in. So the last book that we're going to look at is one that has been on my radar for a long time. This is Nova issue number 1, and this book I think is sort of expensive at the 9.8. And I've been watching it, trying to see whether the value of this one would fall. I think it's come down, but not nearly what I anticipated. With this book, like the last, it is also the first appearance and the origin of a character, specifically of Nova, aka Richard Rider. It is also not a bad read. Not a bad read from Marv Wolfman. So let's go ahead and drill into this one. Let's go ahead first and look at the overall census for this one. 8,100 universal copies out there, a total of 8,700 overall. Again, not a ton of copies out there. The 9.8 has a census count of 545, an FMV of $1,250, which again is a nice chunk of money. That is a nice chunk of money. When you drill into the data, you can see here that the FMV for this one is $1,250. The 30-day average and also the last sale are essentially the same at $1,126. The other thing is the percent of the copies that are out there that are 9.8 blue label is actually 6.7%, 6.7% overall. So let's back out and then let's drill in to the data around the 9.6. There are definitely a lot more copies here of the 9.6, 1,329 copies, but look at the FMV. FMV drops to around $300. And as we drill in, we can see that the numbers come down even more. The 30-day average for this book is $260. The most recent sale, however, was $270. There were a couple of sales here, $270, $249, and then a best offer here in September, early September. So when we look at this one and we start to do our little comparison here, the percent difference between the 9.8 at 1126 and the most recent sale at 270, the percent difference is 123% difference between the two. The absolute dollar amount, $856. Again, sort of real money. That's sort of real money. And my hope with this video is to kind of demonstrate that there are some really awesome comics that you can add to your collection, but you don't always have to go for the 9.8, the 9.6, or even a lesser grade might actually make more sense for you based upon what you're trying to accomplish and based upon your budget. So take the time, dig into the data, make an informed decision. That is one of the big things that I'm a huge proponent of, is using the data, using some logic, figuring out what actually makes sense for us and for you. With that said, I'm going to wrap this video up. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And if you did, I definitely want to encourage you to go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, I definitely want to invite you to do that. And if you want to reach out to me, you can do it on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.
This thing on? Mic check. I just want to make sure y'all can hear me clearly. Yo, should you practice art? Or should art be your practice? I had a question, so I asked it. Not to anyone specifically, but to my inner God, you know? The one that's gonna be a master. The one that's more than a rapper. The one that's an educator. The one that seeks enlightenment. He travels with concepts. He's got the mindset expansive. He understands that his time combined with travel and concepts makes his mind convex. Sort of like when you look at a brain scan. Straight off meditation, we was concaving until we had that eternal dialogue that created our dialect. Now we in distinct rooms of pure souls having them conversations. Synergy and combinations. You fly and we waiting. Indian style in the gold temple.